Hello and welcome to the New Style podcast, The Purpose Pursuit with Hannah Miller. So if you've been listening to the pod for a while, you'll know that the pod has had a name change. And there's no great big reason behind the name change other than the fact that we thought that the Purpose Pursuit is something that we talk about a lot. It's my digital course. And simply we thought, why are we confusing messages by calling different things? So we're going all in with the Purpose Pursuit idea. The content will still be our kind of talking about purpose and personality and keeping it as practical as we possibly can. So the first big change is that we have changed the name to the Purpose Pursuit. And the second change is we're going to have a play with some different formats. We're going to think about this podcast as a little bit more like a magazine where you can have different kinds of articles, you can have Q&A, you can have interviews, and we're going to play with that idea with the pod. So rather than it being exactly the same every time, you might find that sometimes I'm joined by special guests. Sometimes we dig into a topic like we're going to today. Other times I do some Q&A where I answer some of your questions, or we do a bit of like live coaching. And sometimes we're going to have a go at doing a bit more of a private pod where I share some of the thoughts from behind the scenes, what's going on with life, some of my own reflections, a little bit like a look at my diary and my journal. So you're going to have to listen to the episodes to see what kind of episode it's going to be and recognise there's going to be some shift, some change, but everything will have that idea around knowing your purpose, getting to know your personality and keeping it as practical as possible. So you'll see I'm on my own today and I'm sitting in a different room. We're giving it that sort of kitchen feel. And I feel a little bit like a radio presenter. So if you're watching on YouTube, I feel a little bit like I'm going to hand over to somebody for the weather or somebody for the traffic or speak to a caller. But I'm not. I'm just in my kitchen having a chat with you, dear listener, dear watcher, whichever way you're doing it, and talking about a topic that's probably on your mind. So the topic we're going to talk about today is called the sandwich generation. And the reason we're talking about this, well, there's lots of reasons, but so many of you who I am involved with either through work or through social media, you can follow me on Hello Hannah Miller if you don't already. We are talking about this because we are in it. So let's just make sure we all know what it is, because it might be a phrase you don't know. If you're not in it, you will probably be in it. So it's still worth listening if you aren't there right now. In fact, somebody said to me, I think this is on my horizon and I'm not there quite yet. So the sandwich generation or being sandwiched is simply about this idea of having multiple generations to take care of. So it's when you have children who are dependent and you also have parents who have become dependent. You could also be a triple-decker sandwich where you are somebody who is a grandparent who also has parents to look after and children and grandchildren. So actually when my sister had her first baby, I was only 10 years old, so my mum still had me at home and she had become a grandparent and she was very involved in that little boy's care. That little boy who's now in his 30s, but she also had her own parents, her own mum, her stepmother, who was dependent on her. So she was sandwiched in from all directions. So this is not a new phenomenon. And in fact, multi-generational families live together all over the world. So I'm not talking about something that has suddenly appeared. But the reason we're talking about it at the moment and the reason it's been given this name of the sandwich is because there are some new factors that probably weren't part of a previous generation's problems. And those are career. So we are doing this whole problem and doing this whole job whilst also probably working full time. So my mum wasn't, to use her as an example, whereas I am now in this sandwich generation and I am working full time. So that's a new aspect. Families where both partners, if you are together, are working. Then you've got the location aspect, which is new. So we've talked about multi-generational families living together all over the world, but actually we now have families that live all over the world. Zoe, who works with me, her grandparents live in another country. So that means her mum's responsibilities of dealing with parents to be considerate of, they live hundreds and thousands of miles away, and there'll be loads of you listening today. I know somebody I've worked with closely, she was telling me her family live in India, and so she has this other dimension of I'm in this sandwich, but I can't even do what I'd like to because they're not on the doorstep. But it might not be a country, it might just be that you live in a different part of the country. So I live 4 hours away from my parents, and that in and of itself is flipping difficult. Then we've also got on top of that we're living longer. So there are some new factors to this generation issue that, no, it's not a new problem, like most things aren't, but it has some new challenges about it. And so many people I work with are in this phase. They're in the somewhere between 35 to 55, and they are squeezed by having parents who need them and children who need them. We're also having our children a bit older, so that means that your children might be younger when you are facing the aging parents. I actually had my children young, so my children are older, but I am my parents' youngest child. So my parents are older than a lot of my friends' parents are. In fact, I had that conversation with our friends Andy and Emma the other night, and I said, gosh, your parents are a lot younger than mine, and we're pretty much the same age. So I feel that difference, perhaps younger than some of my friends are feeling that. And they know it's coming, and they know this wave is coming, but they're not quite there yet. At the moment, their parents are still quite helpful towards them. But the tide will turn, and they'll see a difference. So I thought we should talk about it because it faces so many of us. About 12% of parents in the UK are in the sandwich generation. That means that they're not just that you have got, it's more than just having living parents and living children. It's that you are in the caregiving of those people. So I wanted to talk about it because it's complicated, and I wanted to just share some of the things that are painful and difficult and stressors, and I wanted to then maybe give us just a few thoughts that we can reflect on around this. I don't have any solutions. If I did have the solutions, I would be living them out right now, and I'm feeling this squeeze. So I'm not going to sit here and say this is an easy fix, but there might be some shifts that we can think about, some ways of looking at it a little bit differently. When you are in this life phase, about 3 hours of your day is about just simply caregiving. That doesn't mean the things that you'd have to do as well, such as the chores that you'd have to do if you lived on your own, but there's this extra element of things you are doing for others. So add those 3 hours into a full-time job, add in commuting, add in other responsibilities and the things you have to do anyway to live, and your day is getting squeezed. That idea of that sandwich, that squeeze being such an issue for you. And I think what happens then is the time pressures squeeze us, and then the travelling pressures squeeze us, because maybe you have to travel half an hour to do that caregiving, or an hour to make sure that you can see that person. And then you're thinking, I don't know whether I'm doing enough. How much is enough? What's the amount I should be doing? Is once a week okay? Should I be there every day? Should they come and live with us? Would that be the solution? And what about me? And what about myself? And what about my needs? And of course, those are going to be the things that go immediately out the window when you have immediate pressures that you are already experiencing. And I think even as I'm talking about it now, when you've had a baby, that kind of what about me is something that you adjust to and realise, actually, right now that's on the back burner, but maybe my time will come again. And I think what's hard with this period of life is that you feel like that time's come again, and maybe you had no gap from the bit before. Maybe you thought there was going to be a bit of time where actually you'd done the caregiving and you weren't going to be caregiving for anybody else, and perhaps they're overlapping, and that maybe wasn't what you expected. Because sometimes people become poorly sooner than we expected. My mum has had a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease for 10 years, and that was never something that we expected. And so 10 years ago, I had a 6-year-old. And so I did not feel ready to be talking about an illness, which was going to be a deterioration illness, at the same time as thinking about the needs of my 6-year-old. So you may have felt a little bit like you have been robbed of that chance to put yourself first a little bit, because that in-between period didn't come. And even if it did come, perhaps it's come sooner and it's been more complex than you ever expected it to be. At the same time as me talking about this with my own parents, my mother-in-law is terminally ill. And that has come from nowhere, in the sense that she was well in the summer and now she is not. And so that is a very different, more finite situation that we're facing, which feels incredibly full on, and so it should. And yet it is going to come to an end, perhaps much sooner than we ever expected. So everybody's stories here are quite different. I'm watching one mother, my actual mother, deteriorate slowly over time, and that's really hard and cruel. Then you have the potential of sudden loss, which is actually how we lost my father-in-law, who died instantly and unexpectedly, very young. And then you have my mother-in-law, who is unexpectedly going to pass away much sooner than we thought, but with a decline that is going to take some time. And all of this, not only is it the squeeze on the natural pressures, it's also taking an emotional toll. So if you are in this life phase, or if you're heading to this life stage, you need to be ready for an emotional toll that's coming your way. And you may already feel like work takes a lot of your emotion. You have a relationship of your own, perhaps, to try and maintain with your partner who you love. That's another challenge. And the children that you're looking after and the toll that comes with that. And I think we also need to recognise with this emotional toll is that you are grieving a relationship shift or the slow loss of someone. You are grieving the end of an era and the beginning of something different, where your relationship with a parent is shifting. There is nothing like giving care to a parent and even like washing their body for you to feel like the tide has turned and I'm now in a role that I never anticipated I would be in. And if I think about it from my perspective, nobody ever talked about this. And that's why I think it's important for us to talk about whether you're in this phase or not. Nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about the complexities of the relationship of caregiving to different groups of people at the same time. And sometimes feeling in the middle of that you are just still a child yourself who needs a parent. And so I just want to just recognise that if you feel any of those things and you're listening to that, it is really normal. It is really, really normal. And it is a part of life that everybody faces in some way, shape or form. You might not be feeling the squeeze in your time, but you are going to feel the squeeze with your emotions. You are going to feel the shift and the change. And it is a normal part of life. Unfortunately, my experience is such that we don't talk about these normal parts of life enough. And then the problem comes with that is that we then feel like our life doesn't meet the expectation that we thought it was going to meet. And it actually doesn't look anything like we thought it would. And then add on that another emotion that I've not mentioned yet, which is just the whole point of guilt. You know, you could feel really guilty that you aren't there as much as you'd like to be, or really guilty that you are resenting some of this and you feel that doesn't feel right, or really guilty that you feel a sense of resentment or jealousy to friends whose life looks quite different. I've got some friends and their parents are really healthy. And I can't say that there aren't moments when I just look at those parents, I know them and just think, I so wish that was the way things were. And I just have to recognise that's quite a normal thing for me to feel. And I have to let it go. I have to process it and be then grateful or at peace with the life that I'm in rather than looking for one that I don't have. I think there's another thing in here which is about recognising if it's getting too much. And if you are a caregiver in a sandwich generation, and I just want to be really clear that I am a caregiver, but I am not in the most squeezed position here, and I don't want to pretend that I am. I'm in a finite period of time with my mother-in-law, and actually my sister is the primary caregiver to my parents. I have them come and stay with me for periods of time, but I have to deal with the guilt of not being closer and the feeling of the fact my parents need me and miss me and would love to speak to me every day if they could. So I do not want to pretend here that I am at the top of the tree of this is the most difficult. There'll be some of you listening to this and you've got a parent to look after and perhaps you have a child with additional needs, and that's another whole ball game to add into this. And so if you're feeling that squeeze, I'm just going to read you a few questions that you might want to reflect on and think, how do you feel about this? Is it getting too much and do you need some more help? Am I experiencing physical symptoms like headaches, insomnia, fatigue more frequently than usual? Do I feel emotionally drained, resentful or overwhelmed by my caregiving responsibilities on a daily basis? Am I struggling to find time for personal interests, hobbies or even basic self-care activities? Do I feel guilty or inadequate, feeling like I'm not meeting everyone's needs, including my own? And finally, have my relationships with my children, my parents, my partner become tense, strained, or more conflict driven? And I think those are some really good questions to reflect on, rather than just the overall arc. Are you feeling the pinch more than you were? Is it feeling like a lot right now? And therefore, what do you need to do about it? So coming back to the sacrifices, I've said that there are financial sacrifices potentially. You might have to adjust the way you work. There could be a career sacrifice. Again, you think, actually, I can't take that role right now, or I need to step back. There could be time sacrifices. I don't want to spend my time like this, but I need to. There could be the emotional toll and the emotional sacrifice of giving to somebody else's needs repeatedly. And also sacrificing your preferences. This is maybe not what you wanted to do or how you wanted to spend today. My husband is amazingly responsible, and watching him at the moment do everything he can to be present for his mom and to be with her in certain visiting situations where other people are there, and watching my sister-in-law Beck and the sacrifice that she's currently making. I am in awe of both of them, and the problem is sacrifice doesn't always come easy. And I was reflecting on this, and I was thinking, somebody mentioned I got loads of messages about this on socials, that sacrifice is not something that we talk about very much or see positively in this world. Sacrifice is seen as a negative thing to do. Don't sacrifice anything you want to do. You can have everything. And actually somebody said, again, the perpetuated lie that we can have it all adds to the problem of sacrifice, because I shouldn't have to sacrifice these things if my life was as it should be, because everyone's told me my life should have everything I want it to have. And the problem with peddling that line, us living that line, and me believing that lie, is that every time you have to do something that involves sacrifice, it feels like, well, I'm off the plan here. This isn't the story. Nobody else is doing this, only I'm doing this. And again, I just want to say it is normal for us to have to sacrifice. Again, I know you know that, but I think it's really good to just normalize this and remind ourselves it is normal for us to sacrifice what we would like to do. And sometimes it's normal to sacrifice dreams for a while, or preferences, or finances, or career. And that might not feel fair. And in fact, it might not even feel fair between family members. But that sacrifice element that we're constantly told we shouldn't have to face, I think we maybe have got to learn to recognise that seasons of life involve that, and all the best things about life involve sacrifice too. So I'm just wondering whether we can think about things a bit differently. I can't give magical solutions to how you're going to get 32 hours in your 24-hour day, because I would love that. I desperately would love more time. I know that I end up choosing to do the stuff and not do the things that really will give me life at times, because those are the things that can wait. But I think if we can start to look at it a little bit differently, and sometimes recognise that when those feelings of resentment or jealousy come, we can recognise them and think, this is normal. This is normal. I can let this go. And I think another thing to do with that is to just keep saying to ourselves sometimes, this is the life that I am in. It doesn't mean everything has to stay as it is and you can't make change. But the life I am in involves having boys at home and boys flying the nest. By the way, if you think it's easy when they're in the 18 to 21 kind of phase, their needs are complex and they need you in a different way. So I do not feel the emotional burden is lifted. You just care about your children differently. And I realise that now. And I have two children at home at the moment. I think recognising the life I'm in involves that, and it involves having a mom who has Parkinson's disease and a mother-in-law who is passing away. And that is the life I am in. So there is no point me looking at my other friends' lives and thinking, I wish that was my mom, or I wish that was the situation, because that is not the life I'm in. So I think making peace with the life you're in is important. And also making peace with, we have expectations that may not be being met. I didn't think my life would look like this is something that loads of people say, including myself. And the problem with expectations is they just cause us so much pain and hurt and disappointment. So I think I would encourage you, as you make your peace with some of these things and you just actually cut yourself some slack and find this place of contentment and acceptance with some of the things that you cannot change, I do think there are some things that we can do. And I think as well as accepting the season, we can make small changes. So we've got the overarching thing that this is not going away, and maybe it shouldn't, and neither should it. But also, what can I shift and what can I do? And I want to turn to somebody called Penny Windsor for a little bit of help here. Penny Windsor is somebody who wrote a book called Tender. And I've actually got to know Penny through some work that I've done. Penny wrote a book called Tender because her story is that she was a teenager who cared for her mom. And then she ended up having a son called Arthur, who is autistic. So she cares for her son. So actually, she's not so much talking about sandwich, but just care more generally, and the caregiving issues and the things that come with care that can be challenging. And I think she's got some golden rules that we can just pick a couple of those up and think about. If this is on your horizon, or if this is your life right now, these are some things you can think about. In fact, if it's on your horizon, I just want to say there are a couple of things you can probably do. First of all, recognise it's normal and listen to podcasts like this. I think you need to talk with your family members before you get to crunch time. Talk to your parents. Try and get your parents to imagine a few years down the line. One thing my parents have been really good at is imagining 5-7 years down the line and preparing for it and being open about those conversations. I think we've got to get comfortable with looking ahead without that feeling really like scary, and really develop the bonds with your siblings if you have them. If you don't have siblings, I really feel for you that's another challenge. Get your friends around you who can be part of that with you. Friends can be family. Some of my friends are some of the closest people in my life, and they're like extra siblings. I do appreciate the challenges though if you don't have siblings to sort of carry that load with. So a couple of golden rules from Penny. Speak up is the first one. She says, talk about your feelings and share how you're feeling. She said that carers are 7 times more likely than the general population to report loneliness and twice as likely to be anxious. So if you are giving care, you need to be able to speak up about those challenges and find those safe places. Sometimes my sister phones me just to talk about a difficult interaction she's had, and she just speaks up and tells me about it. I think we need to take breaks. She talks about how, as much as you want to be the primary carer for these people that you love, your children, your parents, or other people in your life, you can't do it well without support and breaks. And she said sometimes it can feel hard and wrong to feel both these things are true. And that actually she needs to recognise it to do it well, especially when it's really challenging. If you have a parent with dementia or physical needs, or even they have the potential to be angry, or a child that could become angry or very unsettled, you cannot be expected to take from that reserve every day without doing things that give you breaks. Build community, build people around you that can be part of that rest break procedure for you, and actually recognise that somebody else caring for that person for just a little bit might help you go a little bit longer. Carer burnout is a thing. Penny talks about this. Carer burnout is a thing, and we need to protect people from it. And we need to not get to that point before we say, I can't do this, I need help. Somebody I know actually got to a point like that when they were in a caregiving situation. They just simply at that point were like, I've got to get out of this. I've got to get out right now. I've got to get away. And then that became more challenging to handle than actually building in some things that mean you feel that you are putting something back in to give again. Another thing Penny talks about is letting go of control and perfectionism. It may be that you have this idea, whether you are in the sandwich generation or not, you want to be the perfect parent or the perfect child. You're not going to be. And if you just get yourself tied up in that, you're going to feel that you are lacking and guilty. And sometimes something is better than nothing. And that's important. She asks herself a really good question, and she asks herself this in every difficult time. What is the kindest thing I can do for myself right now? So when it's really tricky, when you've just had a really hard interaction, when you feel emotionally really raw from seeing the deterioration of a parent, when you feel emotionally really raw because perhaps they don't remember who you are, or they were cross with you, or you're emotionally raw because your child has now just had a really difficult interaction at school and they need you. What is the kindest thing that you can do for yourself right now? And that might be that you want to go on holiday to Bali, and that's not realistic, but it could be that you do something that feels kind to you, like I'm going to go and have a bath. I'm going to go and pick up the phone, something that's good for me and kind to me. And I think the other point that Penny makes, and I think it's really important, is that it's our collective responsibility to care for the caregivers. So if you're not in this generation, but you know people who are, if you're not the caregiver, you know, even just different types of care, friends who've just had new babies, or friends who've got children with additional needs, or anybody who is in that caring mode, we need to care for the caregivers. If that's not our age and stage, let's be part of the support. Let's scaffold them. Let's hold them up when they are struggling. End-of-life doula Anna Leon said this: there needs to be a pyramid with the cared for at the top, the carers underneath them, and the layer of support that is given by others. And I just want to say two last things. We need to hold on to hope. Accepting that things are different to how we thought they would be doesn't mean that we need to give up on hope. I had the most lovely cup of tea and time with my mum last weekend. You would have thought I'd taken her to the Ritz or to Dubai or to some sort of mega deal, because it was no big thing at all. We went to the card factory. I pushed her in a wheelchair and then we went for a cup of tea. And as much as I would have loved to have been at the Ritz with my mum, or out for the day in London, or at the theatre, I loved the fact I had that time with her. And that difference can still be hopeful and special and mean the world to those people. Accepting the limitations on our life are still, doesn't mean that everything needs to feel hopeless. And holding on to hope and be hopeful for the future, even when it doesn't look like you thought it might, is really important. I think it would be good to finish this pod with the words of Penny, and I'm just going to read you a little quote from her to leave you with. Close your eyes if it makes you feel better, and just have a little... Don't close your eyes if you're driving. That would be a really bad idea. But if you're sitting still, or you can just stop for a second, listen to what Penny says. Through my experiences, I have had my eyes opened to the most beautiful and ugliest of human emotions. I have been racked with fear and guilt, resentful of what has been asked of me. I've seen the most incredible joy, and I've loved harder than I could have ever imagined, and picked myself up sobbing from the floor more times than I thought can even count. The reality is that for most, caring is exactly like the rest of life. Sometimes wonderful, sometimes terrible, and often very ordinary.